Section 41 of The Forgotten Man and Other Essays. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Wayne Cooke. The Forgotten Man and Other Essays by William Graham Sumner. The Forgotten Man, 1883, Part 2. Now you know that the poor and the weak are continually put forward as objects of public interest and public obligation. In the appeals which are made, the terms the poor and the weak are used as if they were terms of exact definition. Except the pauper, that is to say, the man who cannot earn his living or pay his way, there is no possible definition of a poor man. Except a man who is incapacitated by vice or by physical infirmity, there is no definition of a weak man. The paupers and the physically incapacitated are an inevitable charge on society. About them no more need be said. But the weak who constantly arouse the pity of humanitarians and philanthropists are the shiftless, the imprudent, the negligent, the impractical, and the inefficient, or they are idle, intemperate, the extravagant, and the vicious. Now the troubles of these persons are constantly forced upon public attention, as if they and their interests deserved especial consideration, and a great portion of all organized and unorganized effort for the common welfare consists in attempts to relieve these classes of people. I do not wish to be understood now as saying that nothing ought to be done for these people by those who are stronger and wiser. That is not my point. What I want to do is to point out the thing which is overlooked and the error which is made in all these charitable efforts. The notion is accepted as if it were not open to any question, that if you help the inefficient and vicious, you may gain something for society, or you may not, but you lose nothing. This is a complete mistake. Whatever capital you divert to the support of a shiftless and good-for-nothing person is so much diverted from some other employment, and that means from somebody else. I would spend any conceivable amount of zeal and eloquence, if I possessed it, to try to make people grasp this idea. Capital is force. If it goes one way, it cannot go another. If you give a loaf to a pauper, you cannot give the same loaf to a laborer. Now this other man, who would have got it, but for the charitable sentiment which bestowed it on a worthless member of society, is the forgotten man. The philanthropists and humanitarians have their minds all full of the wretched and miserable, whose case appeals to compassion, attacks the sympathies, takes possession of the imagination, and excites the emotions. They push on towards the quickest and easiest remedies, and they forget the real victim. Now, who is the forgotten man? He is the simple, honest laborer, ready to earn his living by productive work. We pass him by because he is independent, self-supporting, and asks no favors. He does not appeal to the emotions or excite the sentiments. He only wants to make a contract and fulfill it, with respect on both sides and favor on neither side. He must get his living out of the capital of the country. The larger the capital is, the better living he can get. Every particle of capital which is wasted on the vicious, the idle, and the shiftless is so much taken from the capital available to reward the independent and productive laborer. But we stand with our backs to the independent and productive laborer all the time. We do not remember him because he makes no clamor. But I appeal to you whether he is not the man who ought to be remembered first of all, and whether, on any sound social theory, we ought not to protect him against the burdens of the good-for-nothing. In these last years I have read hundreds of articles and heard scores of sermons and speeches which were really glorifications of the good-for-nothing, as if these were the charge of society recommended by right reason to its care and protection. We are addressed all the time as if those who are respectable were to blame because some are not so, and as if there were an obligation on the part of those who have done their duty towards those who have not done their duty. Every man is bound to take care of himself and his family and to do his share in the work of society. It is totally false that one who has done so is bound to bear the care and charge of those who are wretched because they have not done so. The silly popular notion is that the beggars live at the expense of the rich, but the truth is that those who eat and produce not live at the expense of those who labor and produce. The next time you are tempted to subscribe $1 to a charity, I do not tell you not to do it, because after you have fairly considered the matter, you may think it right to do. But I ask you to stop and remember the forgotten man, and understand that if you put your $1 in the savings bank, it will go to swell the capital of the country, which is available for division amongst those who, while they earn it, will reproduce it with increase. Let us now go on to another class of cases. There are a great many schemes brought forward for improving the condition of the working classes. I have shown already that a free man cannot take a favor. One who takes a favor or submits to patronage demeans himself. He falls under obligation. He cannot be free, and he cannot assert a station of equality with the man who confers the favor on him. The only exception is where there are exceptional bonds of affection or friendship, that is, where the sentimental relation supersedes the free relation. Therefore, in a country which is a free democracy, all propositions to do something for the working class have an air of patronage and superiority which is impertinent and out of place. No one can do anything for anybody else unless he has a surplus of energy to dispose of after taking care of himself. In the United States, the working classes, technically so called, are the strongest classes. It is they who have a surplus to dispose of, if anybody has. Why should anybody else offer to take care of them or to serve them? They can get whatever they think worth having, and, at any rate, if they are free men in a free state, it is ignominious and unbecoming to introduce fashions of patronage and favoritism here. A man who, by superior education and experience of business, is in a position to advise the struggling man of the wages class, is certainly held to do so, and will, I believe, always be willing and glad to do so. But this sort of activity lies in the range of private and personal relations. I now, however, desire to direct attention to the public, general, and impersonal schemes, and I point out the fact that, if you undertake to lift anybody, you must have a fulcrum or point of resistance. All the elevation you give to one must be gained by an equivalent depression on someone else. The question of gain to society depends upon the balance of the account as regards the position of the persons who undergo the respective operations. But nearly all the schemes for improving the condition of the working man involve an elevation of some working men at the expense of other working men. When you expend capital or labor to elevate some persons who come within the sphere of your influence, you interfere in the conditions of competition. The advantage of some is won by an equivalent loss of others. The difference is not brought about by the energy and effort of the persons themselves. If it were, there would be nothing to be said about it, for we constantly see people surpass others in the rivalry of life and carry off the prizes which the others must do without. In the cases I am discussing, the difference is brought about by an interference which must be partial, arbitrary, accidental, controlled by favoritism and personal preference. I do not say in this case either that we ought to do no work of this kind. On the contrary, I believe that the arguments for it quite outweigh in many cases the arguments against it. What I desire, again, is to bring out the forgotten element which we always need to remember in order to make a wise decision as to any scheme of this kind. I want to call to mind the forgotten man. Because in this case also, if we recall him and go to look for him, we shall find him patiently and perseveringly, manfully and independently, struggling against adverse circumstances without complaining or begging. If then we are led to heed the groaning and complaining of others, and to take measures for helping these others, we shall, before we know it, push down this man who is trying to help himself. Let us take another class of cases. So far we have said nothing about the abuse of legislation. We all seem to be under the delusion that the rich pay the taxes. Taxes are not thrown upon the consumers with any such directness and completeness as is sometimes assumed, but that in ordinary states of the market, taxes on houses fall, for the most part, on the tenants, and that taxes on commodities fall, for the most part, on the consumers is beyond question. Now the state and municipality go to great expense to support policemen and sheriffs and judicial officers to protect people against themselves, that is, against the results of their own folly, vice, and recklessness. Who pays for it? Undoubtedly the people who have not been guilty of folly, vice, or recklessness. Out of nothing comes nothing. We cannot collect taxes from people who produce nothing and save nothing. The people who have something to tax must be those who have produced and saved. When you see a drunkard in the gutter, you are disgusted, but you pity him. When a policeman comes and picks him up, you are satisfied. You say that society has interfered to save the drunkard from perishing. Society is a fine word, and it saves us the trouble of thinking to say that society acts. The truth is that the policeman is paid by somebody, and when we talk about society, we forget who it is that pays. It is the forgotten man again. It is the industrious workman going home from a hard day's work, whom you pass without noticing, who is mulcted of a percentage of his day's earnings to hire a policeman to save the drunkard from himself. All the published expenditure to prevent vice has the same effect. Vice is its own curse. If we let nature alone, she cures vice by the most frightful penalties. It may shock you to hear me say it, but when you get over the shock, it will do you good to think of it. A drunkard in the gutter is just where he ought to be. Nature is working away at him to get him out of the way, just as she sets up her processes of dissolution to remove whatever is a failure in its line. Gambling and less mentionable vices all cure themselves by the ruin and dissolution of their victims. 9/10 of our measures for preventing vice are really protective towards it, because they ward off the penalty. Ward off, I say, and that is the usual way of looking at it. But is the penalty really annihilated? By no means. It is turned into police and court expenses and spread over those who have resisted vice. It is the forgotten man again who has been subjected to the penalty, while our minds were full of the drunkards, spendthrifts, gamblers, and other victims of dissipation. Who is then the forgotten man? He is the clean, quiet, virtuous, domestic citizen who pays his debts and his taxes and is never heard of out of his little circle. Yet who is there in the society of a civilized state who deserves to be remembered and considered by the legislator and statesman before this man? Another class of cases is closely connected with this last. There is an apparently invincible prejudice in people's minds in favor of state regulation. All experience is against state regulation and in favor of liberty. The freer the civil institutions are, the more weak or mischievous state regulation is. The Prussian bureaucracy can do a score of things for the citizen which no governmental organ in the United States can do. And, conversely, if we want to be taken care of as Prussians and Frenchmen are, we must give up something of our personal liberty. Now, we have a great many well-intentioned people among us who believe that they are serving their country when they discuss plans for regulating the relations of employer-employee, or the sanitary regulations of dwellings, or the construction of factories, or the way to behave on Sunday, or what people ought to eat or drink or smoke. All this is harmless enough and well enough as a basis of mutual encouragement and missionary enterprise, but it is almost always made a basis of legislation. The reformers want to get a majority, that is, to get the power of the state, and so to make other people do what the reformers think is right and wise to do. A and B agree to spend Sunday in a certain way. They get a law passed to make C pass it in their way. They determine to be teetotalers, and they get a law passed to make C be a teetotaler for the sake of D, who is likely to drink too much. Factory acts for women and children are right, because women and children are not on an equal footing with men and cannot, therefore, make contracts properly. Adult men in a free state must be left to make their own contracts and defend themselves. It will not do to say that some men are weak and unable to make contracts any better than women. Our civil institutions assume that all men are equal in political capacity and all are given equal measure of political power and right, which is not the case with women and children. If, then, we measure political rights by one theory and social responsibilities by another, we produce an immoral and vicious relation. A and B, however, get factory acts and other acts passed regulating the relation of employers and employee, and set armies of commissioners and inspectors traveling about to see to things, instead of using their efforts, if any are needed, to lead the free men to make their own conditions as to what kind of factory buildings they will work in, how many hours they will work, what they will do on Sunday, and so on. The consequence is that men lose the true education in freedom which is needed to support free institutions. They are taught to rely on government officers and inspectors. The whole system of government inspectors is corrupting to free institutions. In England, the Liberals used always to regard state regulation with suspicion. But since they have come to power, they plainly believe that state regulation is a good thing if they regulate, because, of course, they want to bring about good things. In this country, each party takes turns, according as it is in or out, in supporting or denouncing the non-interference theory. Now, if we have state regulation, what is always forgotten in this? Who pays for it? Who is the victim of it? There always is a victim. The workmen who do not defend themselves have to pay for the inspectors who defend them. The whole system of social regulation by boards, commissioners, and inspectors consists in relieving negligent people of the consequences of their negligence, and so leaving them to continue negligent without corruption. That system also turns away from the agencies which are close, direct, and germane to the purpose, and seeks others. Now, if you relieve negligent people of the consequences of their negligence, you can only throw those consequences on people who have not been negligent. If you turn away from the agencies which are direct and cognate to the purpose, you can only employ other agencies. Here, then, you have your forgotten man again. The man who has been careful and prudent, and who wants to go on and reap his advantages for himself and his children, is arrested just at that point, and he is told he must go and take care of some negligent employees in a factory or on a railroad who have not provided precautions for themselves, or have not forced their employers to provide precautions, or negligent tenants who have not taken care of their own sanitary arrangements, or negligent householders who have not provided against fire, or negligent parents who have not sent their children to school. If the forgotten man does not go, he must hire an inspector to go. No doubt it is often worth his while to go or send, rather than leave the thing undone, on account of his remoter interest. But what I want to show is that all this is unjust to the forgotten man, and that the reformers and philosophers miss the point entirely when they preach that it is his duty to do all this work. Let them preach to the negligent to learn to take care of themselves. Whenever A and B put their heads together and decide what A, B, and C must do for D, there is never any pressure on A and B. They consent to it and like it. There is rarely any pressure on D because he does not like it and contrives to evade it. The pressure all comes on C. Now, who is C? He is always the man who, if let alone, would make a reasonable use of his liberty without abusing it. He would not constitute any social problem at all, and would not need any regulation. He is the forgotten man again. And as soon as he is brought from his obscurity, you see that he is just that one amongst us who is what we all ought to be. Let us look at another case. I read again and again arguments to prove that criminals have claims and rights against society. Not long ago, I read an account of an expensive establishment for the reformation of criminals, and I am told that we ought to reform criminals, not merely punish them vindictively. When I was a young man, I read a great many novels by Eugene Sue, Victor Hugo, and other Frenchmen of the School of 48, in which the badness of a bad man is represented not as his fault, but as the fault of society. Now, as society consists of bad men plus the good men, and as the object of this declaration was to show that the badness of bad men was not the fault of the bad men, it remains that the badness of the bad men must be the fault of the good men. No doubt it is far more consoling to the bad men than even to their friends to reach the point of this demonstration. Let us ask now for a moment, what is the sense of punishment, since a good many people seem to be quite in a muddle about it? Every man in society is bound in nature and reason to contribute to the strength and welfare of society. He ought to work, to be peaceful, honest, just, and virtuous. A criminal is a man who, instead of working with and for society, turns his efforts against the common welfare in some way or other. He disturbs order, violates harmony, invades the security and happiness of others, wastes and destroys capital. If he is put to death, it is on the ground that he has forfeited all right to existence in society by the magnitude of his offenses against its welfare. If he is imprisoned, it is simply a judgment of society upon him that he is so mischievous to the society that he must be segregated from it. His punishment is a warning to him to reform himself, just exactly like the penalties inflicted by God and nature on vice. A man who has committed a crime is, therefore, a burden on society and an injury to it. He is a destructive and not a productive force, and everybody is worse off for his existence than if he did not exist. Whence, then, does he obtain a right to be taught or reformed at the public expense? The whole question of what to do with him is one of expediency, and it embraces the whole range of possible policies, from that of execution to that of education and reformation. But when the expediency of reformatory attempts is discussed, we always forget the labor and expense, and who must pay. All that the state does for the criminal, beyond forcing him to earn his living, is done at the expense of the industrious member of society who never costs the state anything for correction and discipline. If a man who has gone astray can be reclaimed in any way, no one would hinder such a work. But people whose minds are full of sympathy and interest for criminals, and who desire to adopt some systematic plans of reformatory efforts, are only, once more, trampling on the forgotten man. End of section 41. Section 42 of The Forgotten Man and Other Essays. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Wayne Cooke. The Forgotten Man and Other Essays by William Graham Sumner. The Forgotten Man, 1883, Part 3. Let us look at another case. If there is a public office to be filled, of course a great number of persons come forward as candidates for it. Many of these persons are urged as candidates on the ground that they are badly off, or that they cannot support themselves, or that they want to earn a living while educating themselves, or that they have female relatives dependent on them, or for some other reason of a similar kind. In other cases, candidates are presented and urged on the ground of their kinship to somebody, or on account of service, it may be meritorious service, in some other line than that of the duty to be performed. Men are proposed for clerkships on the ground of service in the army 20 years ago, or for customs house inspectors on the ground of public service in the organization of political parties. If public positions are granted on these grounds of sentiment or favoritism, the abuse is to be condemned on the ground of the harm done to the public interest. But I now dare to point out another thing which is constantly forgotten. If you give a position to A, you cannot give it to B. If A is an object of sentiment or favoritism, and not a person fit and competent to fulfill the duty, who is B? He is somebody who has nothing but merit on his side, somebody who has no powerful friends, no political influence, some quiet, unobtrusive individual who has known no other way to secure the chances of life than simply to deserve them. Here we have the forgotten man again. And once again we find him worthy of all respect and consideration, but passed by in favor of the noisy, pushing, and incompetent. Who ever remembers that if you give a place to a man who is unfit for it, you are keeping out of it somebody, somewhere, who is fit for it? Let's take another case. A trades union is an association of journeymen in a certain trade, which has for one of its chief objects to raise wages in that trade. This object can be accomplished only by drawing more capital into the trade, or by lessening the supply of labor in it. To do the latter, the trade unions limit the number of apprentices who may be admitted to the trade. In discussing this device, people generally fix their minds on the beneficiaries of this arrangement. It is desired by everybody that wages should be as high as they can be under the conditions of industry. Our minds are directed by the facts of the case to the men who are in the trade already and are seeking their own advantage. Sometimes people go on to notice the effects of trade unionism on the employers, but although employers are constantly vexed by it, it is seen that they soon count it into the risks of their business and settle down to it philosophically. Sometimes people go further then, and see that if the employer adds the trades union and strike risk to the other risks, he submits to it because he has passed it along upon the public, and that the public wealth is diminished by trades unionism, which is undoubtedly the case. I do not remember, however, that I have ever seen in print any analysis and observation of trades unionism which takes into account its effect in another direction. The effect on employers or on the public would not raise wages. The public pays more for houses and goods, but that does not raise wages. The surplus paid by the public is pure loss, because it is only paid to cover an extra business risk of the employer. If their trade unions raise wages, how do they do it? They do it by lessening the supply of labor in the trade, and this they do by limiting the number of apprentices. All that is won, therefore, for those in the trade is won at the expense of those persons in the same class in life who want to get into the trade but are forbidden. Like every other monopoly, this one secures advantages for those who are in only at a greater loss to those who are kept out. Who, then, are those who are kept out and who are always forgotten in all the discussions? They are the forgotten men again. And what kind of men are they? They are those young men who want to earn their living by the trade in question. Since they select it, it is fair to suppose that they are fit for it, would succeed at it, and would benefit society by practicing it. But they are arbitrarily excluded from it, and are perhaps pushed down into the class of unskilled laborers. When people talk of the success of a trades union in raising wages, they forget these persons who have really, in a sense, paid the increase. Let me now turn your attention to another class of cases. I have shown how, in times past, the history of states has been a history of selfishness, cupidity, and robbery, and I have affirmed that now and always the problems of government are how to deal with these same vices of human nature. People are always prone to believe that there is something metaphysical and sentimental about civil affairs, but there is not. Civil institutions are constructed to protect, either directly or indirectly, the property of men and the honor of women against the vices and passions of human nature. In our day and country, the problem presents new phases, but it is there just the same as it ever was, and the problem is only the more difficult for us because of its new phase which prevents us from recognizing it. In fact, our people are raving and struggling against it in a kind of blind way, not yet having come to recognize it. More than half of their blows at present are misdirected and fail of their object, but they will be aimed better by and by. There is a great deal of clamor about watering stocks and the power of combined capital, which is not very intelligent or well directed. The evil and abuse which people are groping after in all these denunciations is jobbery. By jobbery, I mean the constantly apparent effort to win wealth, not by honest and independent production, but by some sort of a scheme for extorting other people's product from them. A large part of our legislation consists in making a job for somebody. Public buildings are jobs, not always, but in most cases. The buildings are not needed at all, or are costly far beyond what is useful or even decently luxurious. Internal improvements are jobs, not because they are needed in themselves, but because they will serve the turn of some private interest, often incidentally that of the very legislators who pass the appropriations for them. A man who wants a farm, instead of going out where there is plenty of land available for it, goes down under the Mississippi River to make a farm, and then wants his fellow citizens to be taxed to dike the river so as to keep it off his farm. The Californian hydraulic miners have washed the gold out of the hillsides and have washed the dirt down into the valleys to the ruin of the rivers and the farms. They want the federal government to remove this dirt at the national expense. The silver miners, finding that their product is losing value in the market, get the government to go into the market as a great buyer in hope of sustaining the price. The national government is called upon to buy or hire unsaleable ships, to dig canals which will not pay, to educate illiterates in states which have not done their duty at the expense of the states which have done their duty as to education, to buy up telegraphs which no longer pay, and to provide the capital for enterprises of which private individuals are to win the profits. We are called upon to squander 20 millions on swamps and creeks, from 20 to 66 millions on the Mississippi River, 100 millions in pensions, and there is now a demand for another 100 million beyond that. This is the great plan of all living on each other. The pensions in England used to be given to aristocrats who had political power in order to corrupt them. Here the pensions are given to the great democratic mass who have the political power in order to corrupt them. We have 100,000 federal office holders, and I do not know how many state and municipal office holders. Of course, public officers are necessary, and it is an economical organization of society to set apart some of its members for civil functions. But if the numbers of persons drawn from production and supported by the producers while engaged in civil functions is in undue proportion to the total population, there is economic loss. If public offices are treated as spoils or benefices or sinecures, then they are jobs and only constitute part of the pillage. The biggest job of all is a protective tariff. This device consists in delivering every man over to be plundered by his neighbor and in teaching him to believe that it is a good thing for him and his country because he may take his turn at plundering the rest. Mr. Kelly said that if the internal revenue taxes on whiskey and tobacco, which are paid to the United States government, were not taken off, there would be a rebellion. Just then it was discovered that Sumatra tobacco was being imported, and the Connecticut tobacco men hastened to Congress to get a tax laid on it for their advantage. So it appears that if a tax is laid on tobacco, to be paid to the United States, there will be a rebellion. But if a tax is laid on it to be paid to the farmers of the Connecticut Valley, there will be no rebellion at all. The tobacco farmers, having been taxed for protected manufactures, are now to be taken into the system, and the workmen in the factories are to be taxed on their tobacco to protect the farmers. So the system is rendered more complete and comprehensive. On every hand you find this jobbery. The government is to give every man a pension, and every man an office, and every man a tax to raise the price of his product, and to clean out every man's creek for him, and to buy all his unsellable property, and to provide him with plenty of currency to pay his debts, and to educate his children, and to give him the use of a library, and a park, and a museum, and a gallery of pictures. On every side the doors of waste and extravagance stand open, and spend and squander and plunder and grab are the watchwords. We grumble some about it, and talk about the greed of corporations, and the power of capital, and the wickedness of stock gambling. Yet we elect the legislatures who do all this work. Of course, we should never think of blaming ourselves for electing men to represent and govern us who, if I may use a slang expression, give us away. What man ever blamed himself for his misfortune? We groan about monopolies and talk about more laws to prevent the wrongs done by chartered corporations. Who made the charters? Our representatives. Who elected such representatives? We did. How can we get bad lawmakers to make a law which shall prevent bad lawmakers from making a bad law? That is really what we are trying to do. If we are a free, self-governing people, all our misfortunes come right home to ourselves, and we can blame nobody else. Is anyone astonished to find that men are greedy, whether they are incorporated or not? Is it a revelation to find that we need, in our civil affairs, to devise guarantees against selfishness, rapacity, and fraud? I have ventured to affirm that government has never had to deal with anything else. Now I have said that this jobbery means waste, plunder, and loss, and I define it at the onset as the system of making a chance to extort part of his product from somebody else. Now comes the question, who pays for it all? The system of plundering each other soon destroys all that it deals with. It produces nothing. Wealth comes only from production, and all that the wrangling grabbers, loafers, and jobbers get to deal with comes from somebody's toil and sacrifice. Who then is he who provides it all? Go and find him, and you will have once more before you the forgotten man. You will find him hard at work because he has a great many to support. Nature has done a great deal for him in giving him a fertile soil and an excellent climate, and he wonders why it is that, after all, his scale of comfort is so moderate. He has to get out of the soil enough to pay all his taxes, and that means the cost of all the jobs and the fund for all the plunder. The forgotten man is delving away in patient industry, supporting his family, paying his taxes, casting his vote, supporting the church and the school, reading his newspaper, and cheering for the politician of his admiration. But he is the only one for whom there is no provision in the great scramble and the big divide. Such is the forgotten man. He works, he votes, generally he prays, but he always pays. Yes, above all, he pays. He does not want an office. His name never gets into the newspaper except when he gets married or dies. He keeps production going on. He contributes to the strength of parties. He is flattered before election. He is strongly patriotic. He is wanted whenever, in his little circle, there is work to be done or counsel to be given. He may grumble some occasionally to his wife and family, but he does not frequent the grocery or talk politics at the tavern. Consequently, he is forgotten. He is a commonplace man. He gives no trouble. He excites no admiration. He is not in any way a hero, like a popular orator, or a problem, like tramps and outcasts, nor notorious, like criminals, nor an object of sentiment, like the poor and weak, nor a burden, like paupers and loafers, nor an object out of which social capital may be made, like the beneficiaries of church and state charities, nor an object for charitable aid and protection, like animals treated with cruelty, nor the object of a job, like the ignorant and illiterate, nor one over whom sentimental economists and statesmen can parade their fine sentiments, like inefficient workmen and shiftless artisans. Therefore, he is forgotten. All the burdens fall on him or her, for it is time to remember that the forgotten man is not seldom a woman. When you go to Willimantic, they will show you with great pride the splendid thread mills there. I am told that there are sewing women who can earn only 50 cents in 12 hours and provide the thread. And the cost of every spool of thread more than 1 cent is tax. It is paid not to get the thread, for you could get the thread without it. It is paid to get the Willimantic Linen Company, which is not worth having and which is, in fact, a nuisance, because it makes thread harder to get than it would be if there were no such concern. If a woman earns 50 cents in 12 hours, she earns a spool of thread, as nearly as may be, in an hour. And if she uses a spool of thread per day, she works a quarter of an hour per day to support the Willimantic Linen Company, which in 1882 paid 75% dividend to its stockholders. If you go and look at the mill, it will captivate your imagination until you remember all the women in all the garrets, and all the artisans and laborers' wives and children who are spending their hours of labor not to get goods which they need, but to pay for the industrial system which only stands in their way and makes it harder for them to get the goods. It is plain enough that the forgotten man and the forgotten woman are the very life and substance of society. They are the ones who ought to be first and always remembered. They are always forgotten by sentimentalists, philanthropists, reformers, enthusiasts, and every description of speculator in sociology, political economy, or political science. If a student of any of these sciences ever comes to understand the position of the forgotten man and to appreciate his true value, you will find such a student an uncompromising advocate of the strictest scientific thinking on all social topics, and a cold and hard-hearted skeptic towards all artificial schemes of social amelioration. If it is desired to bring about social improvements, bring us a scheme for relieving the forgotten man of some of his burdens. He is our productive force which we are wasting. Let us stop wasting his force. Then we shall have a clean and simple gain for the whole society. The forgotten man is weighted down with the cost and burden of the schemes for making everybody happy, with the cost of public beneficence, with the support of all the loafers, with the loss of all the economic quackery, with the cost of all the jobs. Let us remember him a little while. Let us take some of the burdens off him. Let us turn our pity on him instead of on the good-for-nothing. It will only be justice to him, and society will greatly gain by it. Why should we not also have the satisfaction of thinking and caring for a little while about the clean, honest, industrious, independent, self-supporting men and women who have not inherited much to make a life luxurious for them, but who are doing what they can to get on in the world without begging from anybody, especially since all they want is to be left alone, with good friendship and honest respect. Certainly the philanthropists and sentimentalists have kept our attention for a long time on the nasty, shiftless, criminal, whining, crawling, and good-for-nothing people, as if they alone deserved our attention. The forgotten man is never a pauper. He almost always has a little capital, because it belongs to the character of the man to save something. He never has more than a little. He is, therefore, poor in the popular sense, although in the correct sense he is not so. I have said already that if you learn to look for the forgotten man and to care for him, you will be very skeptical towards all philanthropic and humanitarian schemes. It is clear now that the interest of the forgotten man and the interest of the poor, the weak, and the other petted classes are in antagonism. In fact, the warning to you to look for the forgotten man comes the minute that the orator or writer begins to talk about the poor man. That minute, the forgotten man is in danger of a new assault. And if you intend to meddle in the matter at all, then is the minute for you to look about for him and to give him your aid. Hence, if you care for the forgotten man, you will be sure to be charged with not caring for the poor. Whatever you do for any of the petted classes wastes capital. If you do anything for the forgotten man, you must secure him his earnings and savings. That is, you legislate for the security of capital and for its free employment. You must oppose paper money, wildcat banking, and usury laws, and you must maintain the inviolability of contracts. Hence, you must be prepared to be told that you favor the capitalist class, the enemy of the poor man. What the forgotten man really wants is true liberty. Most of his wrongs and woes come from the fact that there are yet mixed together in our institutions the old medieval theories of protection and personal dependence and the modern theories of independence and individual liberty. The consequence is that the people who are clever enough to get into positions of control measure their own rights by the paternal theory and their own duties by the theory of independent liberty. It follows that the forgotten man, who is hard at work at home, has to pay both ways. His rights are measured by the theory of liberty, that is, he has only such as he can conquer. His duties are measured by the paternal theory, that is, he must discharge all which are laid upon him, as is always the fortune of parents. People talk about the paternal theory of government as if it were a very simple thing. Analyze it, however, and you see that in every paternal relation there must be two parties, a parent and a child. And when you speak metaphorically, it makes all the difference in the world who is parent and who is child. Now, since we, the people, are the state, whenever there is any work to be done or expense to be paid, and since the petted classes and the criminals and the jobbers cost and do not pay, it is they who are in the position of the child, and it is the forgotten man who is the parent. What the forgotten man needs, therefore, is that we come to a clearer understanding of liberty and to a more complete realization of it. Every step which we win in liberty will set the forgotten man free from some of his burdens and allow him to use his powers for himself and for the Commonwealth. End of section 42.